Most people think they know the Deep South. Sweet tea, cotton fields, slow drawls. But this is a place where a canyon appeared in a single lifetime, where roads sank 10 feet into the earth, and where one structure is all that stops the Mississippi from abandoning New Orleans. There is nowhere else on Earth like it. But first, it matters that we understand what the Deep South really is. In the winter of 1860 and 1861, 7 states declared their separation from the Union first: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Those 7 are the Deep South. That is our map. So here are 35 facts that sound impossible but are real. By number 12, they stop being fun and start sounding like a warning. Let's begin. 35. The river that flows backwards. In Mississippi, the Yazoo River runs 188 miles through the delta before meeting the Mississippi at Vicksburg. Every river runs downhill to the sea. That's the one rule water never breaks. The Yazoo breaks it. When the Mississippi climbs past 43 feet on the Vicksburg gauge, it sits higher than the Yazoo's mouth, and the smaller river has nowhere to go but backward. In 2019, that reversal flooded more than 500,000 acres, an area larger than Los Angeles, for over 6 months, with water rising up through the ground itself. 34. The South isn't soft ground and flat fields. Just east of Atlanta, Georgia, sits Stone Mountain, the largest exposed mass of granite on Earth. It rises 825 feet above the plain, a single dome that formed 5 to 10 miles underground about 300 million years ago, when North America collided with Africa. Erosion stripped away everything on top and left the bare rock standing alone. Carved into its north face is the largest bas-relief sculpture in the world, 90 by 190 feet, 3 acres of figures depicting 3 Confederate leaders. 33. The lake that isn't a lake. In Louisiana, just north of New Orleans, Lake Pontchartrain stretches 40 miles across. So wide you can't see either shore from the middle, and despite the name, it isn't a lake. A lake is enclosed fresh water. Pontchartrain is open to the sea, connected through Lake Bourne and a passage called the Rigolets to the Gulf of Mexico, so salt water pushes in with every tide. That makes it an estuary. The French named it in 1699. The people there first called it Oquata, wide water. The map has been wrong for 300 years. 32. The only place 2 ancient predators share. Alligators live across the American South and crocodiles across the tropics. But exactly one place on Earth holds both in the wild: the Everglades in southern Florida. Alligators rule the freshwater interior. Crocodiles prefer the salt and brackish coast. And the tip of Florida is the one spot where fresh inland water meets Gulf saltwater in an unbroken transition. Fewer than 2,000 American crocodiles remain in the entire country, nearly all clustered right here. 2 survivors of the dinosaur age, sharing the only border that forces them together. 31. The mountain that was once taller than Everest. Cheaha Mountain in Alabama is the highest point in the state, and at 2,407 feet, that sounds modest. But it's the worn-down stub of something enormous. Cheaha sits at the southern end of the Appalachians, and a marker on the summit notes this range once stood twice the height of Mount Everest, before hundreds of millions of years of erosion ground it down to the ridge you can drive to today. The Creek called it Chaha, high place, in a state most people picture as flat. 30. The busiest farm road in America is a river. Roughly 60% of all the grain America exports, corn, soybeans, wheat, barely touches a highway. It floats. The Mississippi River system carries it to the export terminals near New Orleans, Louisiana, the largest agricultural shipping hub on the planet. A single 15-barge tow moves what would otherwise take 1,050 trucks. The river drains 40% of the lower 48, 32 states feeding one channel. In 2022, when the water hit a decade low, freight costs tripled and more than 2,000 barges backed up. A drought 1,000 miles north felt at the dinner table. 29. The 500,000 craters no one can explain. Across South Carolina and Georgia, the coastal plain is pocked with around 500,000 shallow, oval depressions called Carolina Bays. From the ground, they look like ordinary ponds. From the air, the pattern is impossible to miss. Every one is an ellipse, and every one points the same way, northwest to southeast, as if something swept across the whole region at once. The orientation even rotates slightly as you move north, as though radiating from one distant point. 16 theories have tried to explain them. None has won. 28. The river that disappears into the ground. The Suwannee begins in Georgia's Okefenokee Swamp and runs 246 miles down through Florida to the Gulf, and along the way, its own tributaries vanish. The Alapaha River, a 202-mile branch, pours straight into a sinkhole near Jennings, Florida, and ends, traveling underground through limestone for miles before rising again at the Alapaha Rise. The Santa Fe River does the same, dropping into the earth at Olino State Park and re-emerging 3.5 miles downstream. Beneath this whole landscape, the rock is hollow. Sometimes, the river is the ceiling. 27. The town that built a monument to thank a pest. In Enterprise, Alabama, there's a statue of a woman holding a giant insect over her head, the only monument on Earth raised in gratitude to an agricultural pest. The boll weevil reached Alabama by 1910, and by 1915, it had gutted Coffee County's cotton. The local gin's output collapsed from 15,000 bales to 5,000 in a single year. Desperate, the farmers switched to peanuts, and within 2 years, the county grew the largest peanut harvest in the nation, richer than cotton ever made it. In 1919, they immortalized the bug that ruined them. 26. The peak where you can see 4 states at once. Brasstown Bald is the highest point in Georgia at 4,784 feet, at the southern tail of the Appalachians. On a clear day, from its 360-degree deck, you can see 4 states: Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and sometimes the Atlanta skyline, 90 miles south. The Cherokee called it Enota. Its English name may be a worn-down Cherokee phrase meaning place of fresh green. Most people file Georgia under peaches and flatlands, but up here, the clouds sit at eye level, and the south becomes a mountain range. Okay, quick break. Honestly, on these videos, the comments are usually better than the facts themselves. Someone always knows the local story behind the place, or the detail we left out. So drop yours down there. And if you want more of these, subscribe. Back to it. 25. The bay that feeds half a state. On the Texas coast, where the Trinity and San Jacinto rivers meet the Gulf, sits Galveston Bay, about 600 square miles of water and the 7th largest estuary in the United States. It looks like plain flat water beside Houston. It's actually a nursery. Its blend of fresh river water and Gulf salt builds a ladder of habitats: seagrass, oyster reef, marsh that raises shrimp, blue crab, red drum, and flounder, producing more than half of all the seafood Texas commercially harvests, while the Houston Ship Channel runs through its middle. 24. The Jurassic salt that made Louisiana rich. Beneath southern Louisiana sit more than 130 buried domes of pure salt, columns left when an arm of the Gulf evaporated around 175 million years ago. Salt is lighter than rock, so over millions of years it flows slowly upward, almost like a fluid, punching through miles of stone toward the surface, some domes 5 miles across. And as they rise, they bend the rock around them into perfect traps for oil and gas. The oil industry that built Louisiana was placed there hundreds of millions of years ago by a dried-up sea. 23. The Spanish moss that's neither Spanish nor moss. It hangs from the live oaks across all 7 Deep South states. The gray curtains that say the South more than almost anything, and the name gets it wrong 3 times. It isn't from Spain. French settlers named it, mocking it as a Spanish beard. It isn't a moss. It's a bromeliad, a cousin of the pineapple. And it isn't a parasite. It has no roots and takes nothing from the trees, pulling all its water and nutrients from the air. The most southern thing on the landscape lives on nothing but rain. 22. The oyster capital that vanished in one season. Apalachicola Bay on the Florida Panhandle once produced 90% of Florida's oysters and 1 in 10 oysters eaten in the entire United States. Then, in September 2012, the oystermen went out for opening day and found almost nothing. The fishery had collapsed. The likely cause traced hundreds of miles upstream. Too much fresh water pulled from the rivers in Georgia, which let salt push deeper into the bay and stress the oysters past their limit. The state closed the bay for years. A 200-year-old way of life ended, not from a storm, but from a slow change in the water. 21. The most aquatically alive place in the country. Alabama doesn't look like a wildlife record holder, but its rivers hold more freshwater species than any other state in America. More than 450 freshwater fish, around 180 species of mussels, more than live in all of South America. Hundreds of snails and crayfish. The reason is history. Alabama's rivers were never scraped by Ice Age glaciers, so for tens of millions of years, life kept piling up undisturbed. One river near Birmingham holds 10 species found nowhere else on Earth. The dark side. Alabama has lost more aquatic species to extinction than any other state too. 20. The summit where you stand in 2 states at once. Sassafras Mountain is the highest point in South Carolina, at about 3,553 feet up in the Blue Ridge. On top sits an observation tower, and the state line between North and South Carolina runs straight through the middle of it. So you can stand with 1 foot in each state. The summit also sits on the Eastern Continental Divide, so rain on one side eventually reaches the Atlantic, while rain on the other flows to the Gulf of Mexico. 1 mountaintop, 2 states, 2 oceans. 19. The largest river swamp on the continent. In south-central Louisiana lies the Atchafalaya Basin, 1.4 million acres of cypress swamp, bottomland forest, and marsh, larger than Grand Canyon National Park, the biggest river swamp in North America. Half of all the migratory waterfowl on the continent pass through it, and it produces around 23 million pounds of crawfish a year. But the basin only exists because of one decision. The Atchafalaya is a shortcut the Mississippi has been trying to take to the sea for centuries, and it nearly succeeded. Hold on to that. We come back to it at number 1. 18. The road that sank 10 feet into the earth. The Natchez Trace runs 444 miles from Natchez, Mississippi, up toward Nashville, one of the oldest travel routes on the continent, walked first by the Natchez, Choctaw, and Chickasaw peoples. In the early 1800s, boatmen who'd floated their goods downriver walked home along it by the thousands. And in the soft, wind-laid silt of the southern stretch, all those feet and hooves and wagon wheels wore the path down. Year by year, it sank, until travelers walked through a trench 10 to 20 feet below the ground. You can still walk it today, a tunnel carved by nothing but footsteps. 17. The night the sea hands itself to the shore. On the eastern shore of Mobile Bay, in Alabama, there's an event locals call a Jubilee, and this is the only place on Earth it happens reliably enough to have a name. On certain still summer mornings before dawn, flounder, crabs, shrimp, and eels crowd into the shallows by the thousands. So dense, people scoop them up by hand. It isn't magic. Decaying matter in the deep bay strips oxygen from the bottom water. A gentle east wind and rising tide push that dead layer toward shore, hurting everything that can't breathe ahead of it. Word spreads in the dark, Jubilee, and the bay lays its harvest at the waterline. 16. The flattest state in America. Florida's highest natural point is Britton Hill, up in the Panhandle in Walton County, and it tops out at just 345 feet above sea level. That's the lowest, highest point of any state in the country, more than 100 feet below the next lowest, in Delaware. The reason is the ground. Florida is a young limestone platform that spent most of the last 100 million years underwater, and only recently rose above the waves. Britton Hill isn't even out on the famous peninsula. It's a quiet pine rise. The highest ground in all of Florida is a hill you could drive past without noticing. 15. The wild Spanish horses of a Georgia island. Cumberland Island is Georgia's largest barrier island, 17.5 miles long, reachable only by ferry, and roaming it freely are around 120 to 150 wild horses. They're feral, descended from animals the Spanish brought as far back as the 1560s. Horses were documented here by 1742. There are no fences, no owners, no one feeding them. They wander the dunes, the maritime forest, and the empty beaches on their own terms. It comes at a cost. The herd eats up to 400 tons of vegetation a year, slowly reshaping the island. Beautiful, and not quite supposed to be there. 14. The longest bridge over water on Earth. Back at Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana, 2 parallel bridges run dead straight across the open water, and the longer, at 23.87 miles, holds the Guinness record for the longest bridge over water in the world. For about 8 miles in the middle, you lose sight of land entirely, just the car and water to the horizon. The first span was built in only 14 months in 1956. China opened a longer bridge in 2011, but Guinness kept the record because the causeway never once touches land. 24 miles of road across a sea that isn't even a lake. 13. The last great old-growth forest in the South. Just southeast of Columbia, South Carolina, stands Congaree National Park, the largest unbroken stretch of old-growth bottomland hardwood forest left in the United States. Most of the South's giant floodplain forests were logged a century ago. This one survived. The trees are among the tallest in eastern North America, some topping 160 feet, and the park holds 25 national champions, the biggest known tree of their species anywhere in the country. The secret is the flooding. The river spills its banks more than 10 times a year, growing the trees to cathedral scale, a forest that exists because it drowns. 12. The Grand Canyon that humans made by accident. In Stewart County, Georgia, there's a network of 16 canyons up to 150 feet deep. Their walls banded in 43 colors of soil. It looks ancient. It isn't. 200 years ago, this was flat farmland. Settlers cleared the forest for cotton and plowed straight up and down the slopes, and the rainwater, with nothing to slow it, cut through the hard red clay into the soft sand beneath. By the 1850s, there were gullies a few feet deep. Within a single lifetime, they were gorges, and the walls still pull back 3 to 5 feet every year. A canyon carved in under 50 years, by farming done wrong. So far, the Deep South has mostly surprised us. From here, it starts to unsettle us, because nearly every fact left is about the same force: water, what it built here, and what it's quietly taking back. 11. The hidden ocean under 4 states. Beneath Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, and Florida lies one of the most productive aquifers on the planet, the Floridan Aquifer, a layer of water-filled limestone spread across roughly 100,000 square miles. It's not an underground lake, it's solid rock, dissolved over millions of years into a sponge that holds water in every pore. Nearly 10 million people drink from it, and in much of the region, it's the only fresh water there is. But the same porous limestone that stores the water also lets pollution, and near the coast saltwater, seeps straight in. An ocean of fresh water, only as safe as the ground above it. 10. The richest farmland in the South is the floor of a Dead Sea. Running in a 300-mile crescent through central Alabama and into Mississippi is a band of dark, fertile earth called the Black Belt. That darkness is chalk, and that chalk is the bottom of an ocean. Around 70 million years ago, the Gulf of Mexico reached far inland and covered this land. Tiny sea creatures died, sank, and piled their shells into a thick chalk layer. The sea drained, the chalk weathered into deep, black soil. It grew the cotton that shaped the entire economy and history of the Deep South. The wealth and the weight of this region grew out of a vanished sea. 9. The city built by people who weren't supposed to be able to build one. In northeastern Louisiana stand 6 concentric earthen ridges and a 72-foot mound, a planned settlement on the scale of a city. It's 3,400 years old, older than the Roman Empire, and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But here's what changes the story. Who built it? Not farmers. The people of Poverty Point were hunter-gatherers, and the old assumption was you needed farming and permanent towns before a project this big was possible. They had none of it. By hand, one 50-pound basket at a time, they moved 53 million cubic feet of earth. 8. The Deep South cliffs built entirely by wind. Along the eastern bank of the Mississippi, through Mississippi and into Louisiana, run tan near vertical cliffs up to 90 feet tall. They look like they belong in the dry Great Plains, not the green South, and they were built by wind. During the Ice Age, glaciers far to the north ground rock into fine dust. Meltwater rivers carried it south, the wind lifted it, and it settled along the edge of the Mississippi Valley over tens of thousands of years. The result is loess, silt so fine and packed it stands in vertical walls. It's the same soft ground that let the Natchez Trace sink 10 feet. 7. The city where your front yard and backyard drain to different oceans. Atlanta, Georgia sits squarely on the Eastern Continental Divide, the ridge that decides which way the water goes. Rain on one side of the line flows eventually to the Atlantic. Rain on the other runs to the Gulf of Mexico. In parts of the metro, that boundary cuts through neighborhoods, so a storm landing on your roof can split toward two oceans depending on which way the slope tips. Atlanta exists because of this high ground, founded on the divide as a railroad junction, on the highest average elevation of any major city east of the Mississippi. 6. America's fastest sinking city. Houston, Texas is dropping faster than any other major city in the country. A 2025 study found about 42% of the metro area is subsiding more than 5 millimeters a year, and in some spots, the ground falls as much as 2 inches annually. The western suburb of Katy has lost around 14 inches in just 2 decades. The cause is mostly underground. Pump out enough water and oil from beneath the city, and the ground loses the pressure that held it up, so it compacts and the surface drops. In a region this flat and this close to sea level, that's dangerous. 5. The swamp where the ground itself trembles. Straddling the Georgia-Florida line is the Okefenokee, one of the largest intact freshwater swamps in North America. Around 438,000 acres of black water and floating peat. The water runs the dark color of strong tea, stained by centuries of slowly rotting plants, and the land isn't solid. Much of the surface is a thick mat of peat floating on water, so when you step onto it, the ground shakes beneath your feet, which is exactly what the name means. Okefenokee comes from a native word for land of the trembling earth. Vast, ancient, and far more fragile than it looks. 4. The place where 4 different Americas collide. In southeast Texas, near the Louisiana border, sits Big Thicket, a 100,000-acre preserve they call the biological crossroads of America. 4 great ecosystems meet and overlap in one small area: eastern hardwood forest, southern swamp, central prairie, and pine savanna. Because of that collision, you can find desert cacti within sight of swamp orchids and carnivorous plants beside hardwood giants. More than 1,300 plant species in a single zone. It was named one of the world's first international biosphere reserves, but what's protected now is only the surviving core of a once enormous wilderness. 3. The city the sea is invading from underneath. Miami, Florida faces a flood threat no seawall can stop, because the water isn't only coming over the edge, it's coming up through the ground. Miami is built on limestone so porous it behaves like a sponge. As the sea rises, salt water seeps sideways and upward through the rock, lifting the water table beneath the streets. On the highest tides, water bubbles out of storm drains and through cracks in the pavement on clear, sunny days. No storm, no rain. You cannot wall out water that rises from below your foundations. It's the one major American city where the ground itself is turning against it. 2. The coastline that disappears while you watch. Louisiana is dissolving into the Gulf, and the pace is hard to absorb. The state loses roughly a football field of land every 100 minutes, all day, every day. Since the 1930s, it has lost around 2,000 square miles of coast, an area larger than the entire state of Delaware, turned to open water. The cause is partly the very thing meant to protect it. The levees that tame the Mississippi also stop it from spreading the sediment that once rebuilt the wetlands each year. Starved of fresh mud, the marshes sink and the Gulf moves in. A state is quietly shrinking off the bottom of the map. 1. The river is trying to leave, and one structure is all that stops it. About 45 miles north of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, sits a complex of floodgates most Americans have never heard of: the Old River Control Structure. It is, quite literally, the only thing keeping the Mississippi River where it is. For centuries, the Mississippi has been trying to jump its banks and take a shorter, steeper path to the Gulf, down the Atchafalaya, the Great Swamp from number 19. Left alone, the Army Corps determined the river would have switched course by 1990. If it ever does, it abandons New Orleans and Baton Rouge, leaving the cities, the ports, and the drinking water of millions stranded on a dying channel. So in 1963, engineers built the gates that hold the split at 70 to 30. The entire lower Deep South now hangs on a single structure, against a river that has never stopped pushing, and every year it pushes again. That's 35 facts about the 7 states of the Deep South. Tell me in the comments which one got you the most, and subscribe for the next region. See you then.